It was pouring rain the day my daughter slammed the door in my face. Not just a drizzle, the kind of thunderstorm that makes the sky look like it's crying for you. My clothes were soaked through, my suitcase broke open on the concrete, and the man she married, the same man I had warned her about, stood behind the glass with a smug little grin. And just like that, I was homeless. Let me introduce myself properly before I continue. My name is Gloria Mayfield, and I am 87 years old. I was born in a small farming town in Kansas, back when horses outnumbered cars and milk still came in glass bottles. I raised my only daughter, Elsie, with nothing but the strength of my 2 hands, the calluses on my palms, and a prayer whispered into my apron each morning. I scrubbed floors in rich people's houses, cleaned toilets, and made sacrifices a child could never understand, just to give her a better life than I had.
But none of that mattered now.
Not to her. I had nowhere to go.
I had no cell phone.
No money in my purse, except 2 crumpled $5 bills and a faded photograph of Elsie when she was 4, missing her 2 front teeth and clutching a teddy bear I'd sewn from scraps. How did it come to this? How did my baby girl grow into a woman who could kick her own mother out into the storm just because her husband told her to? Let me tell you something, because no one else will. This didn't start today. It didn't start when they sent me to live in the basement like I was an old pair of shoes. It didn't even start when I heard them whispering about nursing homes and selling the house.
No.
This story started long before that. It started when I was just 9 years old and locked in a dark room with nothing but roaches and silence. You want to know what happened to me? Why I stopped trusting anyone but God. Why I never let my shadow touch another man's again until I gave birth to Elsie. I'll tell you, but I warn you, my story is not pretty. My story is not sweet. But my story is real. And maybe, just maybe, it'll help you understand why I stood in the rain that day, broken and betrayed, but not begging. Because the truth is,
If I survived worse.
much worse. The thunder cracked again above me. A neighbor's curtain shifted, but nobody opened their doors. Not for me. Not for the crazy old lady they said talked to herself. Not for the burden who once brought birthday cakes to half the block. I picked up the pieces of my broken suitcase, lifted my chin, and began to walk, barefoot through the puddles, with mud in my skirt and fire in my chest. You really want to know why I didn't cry the day my daughter slammed that door on me? It's because I learned not to cry a long, long time ago, in a room with no windows, no warmth, and no mercy. I was only 9 years old when my mother remarried. She said she was tired of being lonely. She called it God's second chance. But, to me, it felt like a punishment. His name was Clyde Rollins. A man with slicked back hair, sharp yellow teeth, and the kind of voice that made your skin itch even when he smiled. I never liked the way he looked at me, even on their wedding day. He brought his son with him, Ricky, a quiet boy a little older than me, who didn't speak much, but stared at his own shoes like they were trying to whisper secrets to him. It didn't take long before things changed. Mama stopped singing in the kitchen. She stopped kissing me goodnight. She started saying things like, "Do what Clyde says or we both suffer." And one day, just like that, she was gone.
Dead.
They said it was a fever. But I never believed that. Because just a few days before she passed, I saw her crying in the bathroom, whispering, "I'm sorry, Gloria. I should have never brought him into our home." After the funeral, everything turned black. Literally. Clyde dragged me by my hair into the cellar and locked me inside a dark room behind a false wall. No windows. No light. No blankets.
No calendar.
Just 4 walls, a bucket, and a tray of stale food once a day. And that became my life. I screamed at first. Oh, how I screamed. I scratched at the walls. I banged on the pipes. I begged God to let me die. But no one ever came. No one ever knew. Because Clyde had made sure of it. Built the room himself. Said it was for storage, but really, it was for me. For 9 years, I didn't see sunlight. For 9 years, I was fed like a stray dog. And sometimes not at all. But you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the hunger. It wasn't even the rats that crawled across my legs in the dark. It was what Clyde did when he'd open that door. What he allowed other men to do. What he forced me to accept, with a belt in one hand and a cigarette in the other. He would say, "You were born for this, Gloria. That's why God kept you." And when I tried to fight, he'd say, "Don't make it worse. Ricky's watching."
Yes.
His own son watched. Sometimes he even joined in. I don't know what was more terrifying, Clyde or Ricky's empty eyes. I survived by going somewhere else in my mind. I would imagine a meadow with wildflowers, a tiny house where no one could touch me, a day when I would walk out, look the sun in the eye, and breathe again. But it never came. Not for 9 long years. Until one day something happened that changed everything. One of the men Clyde brought in wore a blue denim cap. I remember it because it had a patch that read, U.S. Postal Service. He came in, did his evil. But before he left, he said something that nearly made me faint. "This ain't right, Clyde. This girl's not even a woman. You're gonna get caught one day." He never came back after that. But I held on to those words like they were a key. You're gonna get caught. It meant someone knew. It meant someone saw me. And from that day forward, I stopped waiting for a miracle. I started planning my escape. One night, I heard Clyde stumbling drunk upstairs. His heavy boots thudded like thunder above me. Ricky was out. He had started working at a mechanic shop down the road. That's when I saw it. A sliver of moonlight. The trapdoor had been left open. For the first time in 9 years, the room wasn't completely dark. And that was the sign I had waited for. My heart pounded like a hammer against my ribs. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. I just listened, waited, and when the silence stretched long enough, I did what I hadn't dared in nearly a decade. I crawled up the stairs, barefoot, thin as bone, dressed in a dirty flannel shirt that once belonged to my mother. And when I reached the top, I ran. You ever run so fast your legs forget they're tired? That night, I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel the gravel cutting into my feet. I didn't feel the blood running down my legs or the hunger that had lived in my belly for years. I just ran. It was after midnight when I burst through the front door and into the fields behind Clyde's house. That old Kansas wind hit my face like a slap, but it also kissed me like freedom. The stars above were the first lights I had seen since I was a child. For 9 years, I had forgotten what the world looked like. Now it was so big I could barely breathe. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. Just the sound of my own heartbeat and a whisper in my soul saying, "Keep moving, Gloria. Don't you dare stop now." I ran until I collapsed near a ditch beside an old cornfield. That's where a farmer named Lou Hammond found me. He thought I was dead. I remember waking up on a warm couch, wrapped in a quilt that smelled like hay and tobacco. His wife, Edith, had tears in her eyes when she saw me blink. They didn't ask too many questions at first.
Just fed me soup.
Gave me clean clothes. Let me rest. But I was skittish, like a wild animal. I flinched at every sound. I couldn't sleep with the door closed. I didn't talk for weeks. But they were kind, patient. They gave me a journal and told me to write whatever I couldn't say.
So I did.
I wrote every detail. Every night in that dark room. Every man's face. Every scream I held inside. And I hid that journal under the floorboard of the room they gave me, because something in me still didn't believe I was safe. You see, freedom is not something you just feel when you've been caged that long. It's something you have to learn. Lou and Edith tried to get the police involved, but I was too scared to testify. I was only 18 by the time I escaped, barely legal, barely breathing. They offered to adopt me, but I said no. I needed to disappear. So one early morning, before the rooster even crowed, I took the $20 Lou left on the table and caught a bus going anywhere but there. I ended up in a small town in Missouri, working at a diner called Gracie's Grill. The owner, Miss Gracie, was tough as nails but had a soft spot for broken girls like me. She let me sleep in the pantry until I saved enough for a room of my own. That's where I changed my name, dropped Rollins forever. I became Gloria Mayfield, a name I chose myself. a name no man could take from me. And I promised myself, no matter how hard life got, no matter how poor or lonely, I would never be a victim again. But life has a funny way of testing your promises. Because a few years later, a man came into the diner.
Tall.
Quiet. Kind eyes. His name was Walter Dean. He was different, I told myself. He said things like, "I never hurt a woman, and you're safe with me." I believed him. He didn't know about the cellar. He didn't know about the things I couldn't say. He just knew how to make me laugh. We married after 6 months. And a year later, I gave birth to the only sunshine I've ever known, Elsie. She had his smile, my nose, and a giggle that melted all the pain I had locked inside. For the first time in my life, I felt clean. I felt human. I felt like maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten me. I built my world around that child. But if you're still listening, then you already know. She would be the one to break me again. I still remember the first time Elsie called me too much. She was 13, just starting to wear eyeliner behind my back, already dreaming of big cities and a life that didn't include small-town diners or broken mamas. I had asked her not to go out that night. Storm was rolling in. My bones felt it in the ache of my knees. She looked at me with those teenage eyes, part pity, part rebellion, and said it plain. "You're too much, Mama. You're always worried. Always scared."
I'm not you.
She didn't know how deep that cut me. Because everything I did, every locked door I checked twice, every night I stood by her bedroom like a silent guard, every prayer whispered into her hair as she slept. It wasn't paranoia. It was protection. But she didn't understand.
Not then.
Not when she was still soft, still blooming, still untouched by the cruelty of the world I barely escaped. She thought my fear was weakness. But really, it was the strength of a mother who had once been fed to wolves. Still, I let her grow. I gave her space. I swallowed my anxiety like spoiled milk. I worked 2 jobs, days at Gracie's, nights at the motel off Route 9, just so she could have better shoes, nicer school lunches, music lessons. I never dated again after Walter died in that car crash. Didn't even look another man in the eye. All I wanted was to raise my girl in peace. And for a while, we had it. High school, graduation, scholarships. She got accepted into a university in North Carolina. I cried on the bus back home after dropping her off, half proud, half terrified. And then, she met him. Luther Kane. From the first time I heard his voice over the phone, my gut twisted. He spoke smooth, but too smooth, like a man who'd practiced lies in front of a mirror. He laughed at things that weren't funny. He called me Mama G, even though I never gave him permission. When they came home for Thanksgiving, I saw it in Elsie's eyes. The change. The coldness. She didn't sit close anymore. Didn't help me in the kitchen. Didn't ask how I was feeling. Luther answered for her. Corrected her. Brushed crumbs off her sleeve like she was a doll he kept polished. He would call her his queen, but behind his smile, there was something cruel. Calculated. Controlling. I knew that kind of man. I had survived that kind of man. So I did what any mother would do. I warned her. That man's spirit ain't right, baby. He's not gonna love you the way you deserve. And that's when she said it, words that still echo in my bones. You just want me to stay afraid like you. You don't know what love is. That was the beginning of the end. They got married without inviting me. She told me over text. A text. Then stopped answering my calls. Moved to Georgia. Changed her number. Blocked me on Facebook. For 2 years, I didn't hear a word. I sent birthday cards. Letters. Prayers. Nothing. And then one summer evening the phone rang. It was Elsie. Her voice was different.
Shaky. Small.
She said, "Mama, can I come stay with you?"
Just for a while.
I don't know who I am anymore. She showed up the next day with nothing but a duffel bag and a bruise under her eye she tried to hide with makeup. I didn't ask questions. I didn't lecture. I just opened the door and held her. Because no matter what she had done, she was still my baby. And I thought, maybe this was our second chance. But Luther didn't let go so easy. He started calling, driving by the house, leaving notes on my mailbox that said things like, "You can't keep her forever." And then he started talking to my neighbors,
Told them stories about me.
that I was unstable, that I had a past, that I brainwashed his wife. Some believed him. Even Elsie started pulling away again. Whispers at night, locked doors, eyes that didn't meet mine at the breakfast table. Then one night, she said it straight.
Nana.
"I think maybe it's time you lived somewhere safer. Like, with people your age." And just like that, I knew. She had chosen him again. She didn't remember the cellar,
The dark.
the men, the survival. She only remembered the parts of me that trembled when someone raised their voice. She saw weakness where there had been war. And 3 days later, they kicked me out. Rain pouring. Luther smirking from the doorway. Elsie looking everywhere, but at me. No shoes on my feet. No money in my hand. Just an old suitcase and a heart that had carried too much for too long. But this time, I wasn't going to run. I was going to rise. I didn't cry when the door shut behind me. I didn't scream. Didn't beg. Didn't pound on the wood like I did all those years ago in the cellar. I just stood there under that heavy Georgia rain, soaked, shivering, and still. Because I knew something they didn't. I had already survived worse. And this time, I wasn't alone. Across the street, an old woman named Miss Carroll had been watching from her porch. Everyone thought she was senile, wore pink house slippers year-round, and kept plastic flamingos in her yard. But Miss Carroll knew pain when she saw it. She came down those steps faster than I thought a woman with a cane could move, held a pink umbrella over my head, and said, "You ain't sleepin' in no rain tonight, Miss Gloria. Not on my watch." I didn't argue. I couldn't. I followed her up the steps like a lost child and sat on her floral print couch while she made me ginger tea and a grilled cheese sandwich. That night, I slept in a real bed, warm, safe, and with the soft tick-tick of a clock on the wall reminding me I was still alive. By morning, she had already called someone. The Graced Hand shelter was 5 blocks away. A home for elderly women who'd been cast out, beaten, forgotten. Some were like me, mothers pushed aside. Others had never known love at all. But all of us carried the same thing in our eyes. A silent kind of fire. They gave me a small room with a patchwork quilt and a window that faced the sunrise. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt reborn. Miss Carroll visited every Thursday. We played checkers and talked about old TV shows. She brought me fresh socks and lemon cookies she baked herself. And on the 5th Thursday, she did something that changed everything. She brought me a box. A dusty old shoebox I hadn't seen in over 40 years. I opened it and gasped. Inside, wrapped in a yellowing piece of fabric, was my journal, the one I wrote in when I escaped the cellar. Miss Carroll smiled and said, "Your old neighbors in Missouri tracked me down through a church bulletin. They've been holding on to this for decades. Said you might need it someday." I ran my fingers over the pages. Every ugly detail, every name, every memory. Still here, still waiting. And that's when the idea came. I started writing again. At first just for me. But then the shelter director, Miss Danica, read a few pages and said, "This isn't just a story, Gloria. It's a testimony. You need to share this." I laughed. Who would want to hear from an old woman like me? But Miss Danica didn't let it go. She sent my writing to a friend at the local paper. And 2 weeks later, a journalist came to the shelter with a voice recorder, trembling hands, and tears in her eyes. She said, "I read your story. We have to publish this. The world needs to know what you lived through." The article ran in the Atlanta Daily Sun with a headline, "From Darkness to Dignity, One Woman's Survival Story Through Generational Abuse." My phone rang off the hook for days. Churches called, book clubs, even a women's justice group from Washington. And one afternoon, a knock at the door. I opened it to see a young woman holding a microphone, followed by a cameraman.
She said,
"Miss Gloria Mayfield? I'm with Channel 4. We want to tell your story on the evening news. You're a hero." I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just a woman who refused to stay silent. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I had found my voice, and the world was finally listening. But as with all things, not everyone was happy. Because 2 states away, in a suburban home with a white picket fence, my daughter saw the story. And Luther did too. And within days, I got a letter from a lawyer saying I had defamed his name, saying I was spreading lies, saying they were going to sue me for slander. But I didn't shake, because I had the truth. I had my words. I had my journal. And for the first time in my life, I had power.
We stayed in that living room for hours. The clock on the wall ticked so loud, it felt like it was counting down something, but I didn't know what. Loretta cried until her voice cracked, and then she sat in silence. Pastor Ray eventually left, quietly nodding at me, like he knew this part had to be between just the two of us. I sat beside my daughter, our knees barely touching. Her hands trembled in her lap. She was no longer the cold, distant woman who shoved me out the front door. She looked like a scared child. And in that moment I didn't see betrayal. I saw a little girl who had spent her life holding in too many secrets. And I realized I had done the same. "You should have asked me," she whispered. "You should have noticed." "I should have," I said honestly. "I needed you, Mama. When it started, I didn't know how to say it. I was 15 the first time." My heart stopped. I leaned in, gently brushing her hair from her face like I used to do when she was little. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," I told her. "Not for another minute." She nodded slowly. I thought marrying him would make it go away. If I acted like everything was normal, maybe it would become normal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But I didn't. I stayed still. Strong. Because she didn't need more anger. She needed a mother. "I kept him close," she continued. "Because I was afraid of what he'd do if I tried to leave. He threatened to take June. Said no one would believe me. And I believed him. That's how abusers win. Not with fists, but with fear. Not with bruises, but with control. But when I kicked you out," she paused, her voice cracking, "it wasn't because I hated you. He told me if I didn't get rid of you, he'd hurt June. I didn't know what to do. I panicked." A tear slid down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. "I forgive you," I whispered. "And I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me confused. "You're not?" I shook my head. "You think a little rain and a slammed door can scare me away from my baby? Loretta, I've been through worse than Clint Ryerson. And if I have to burn every bridge he ever built to keep June safe, I will." That was the moment her walls finally cracked for good. She leaned into me, sobbing into my shoulder. I held her like I used to when she was sick, rocking her gently, whispering, "I've got you now." When June came home later that evening, she was surprised to see me. She ran to hug me, all excitement and sweetness, her little arms around my waist. I looked at Loretta, and she gave a small nod. "Go play in your room, sweet pea," Loretta said, her voice soft but steady. Once June was gone, we talked about what had to happen next. "I can't protect her if I stay with him," Loretta said. "Then we leave. But he's the one with the money. The house. Everything's in his name. Then we take back your life. Step by step." I told her about the letter I'd sent. About the case we'd started to build. About Darla Jenkins and what she'd revealed. We had more than enough to make the authorities pay attention now. And we weren't alone. Pastor Ray had agreed to speak on Loretta's behalf if it came to court. Denise was documenting everything. Even Darla had said she'd testify if needed. "You're not just one scared woman," I told Loretta. "You're a mother. And that's the most powerful thing on this earth." We spent the next few days quietly gathering documents, making backup copies, stashing them in Denise's house. Loretta called an attorney. A female one. Sharp. Ruthless. We were playing chess now, not checkers. The morning Clint came home early and found me in the kitchen. Everything shifted. He froze. I turned slowly from the stove and looked him in the eye. "Hello, Clint," I said calmly. "Care for some eggs?" He didn't smile. He just squinted like he was sizing me up. "Thought you were gone for good." "I was," I replied, flipping the eggs. "But I came back." He looked like he wanted to say something cruel, but Loretta walked in, holding a folder in her hands. "Sit down," she said to him. "We need to talk." And just like that, the man who used to control every room he entered sat down. Loretta had taken back her voice, and she wasn't going to lose it again. The first battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Clint sat down slow, eyes darting between me and Loretta like a trapped animal. I could see it in his face, the way his jaw clenched, the twitch at the corner of his eye. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one in control. The kitchen was still. The refrigerator hummed low, and the clock on the wall ticked just a little too loud. But in that silence, something powerful was happening. Loretta laid the folder flat on the table in front of him. "These are copies," she said, voice steady, even though her hands were shaking slightly. "Police records. Darla's testimony. Child services documentation. A letter from a witness." Clint didn't touch it. He just sneered. "So this is what you're doing now? Digging up my past?" "No," she said. "I'm protecting our daughter's future." He chuckled darkly, leaning back in his chair. "You think you can win? Against me?" "I don't think," I said, stepping forward. "I know. Because this time she's not alone." For a second I thought he might explode. But instead he smirked like the coward he'd always been. He pushed back his chair and stood. "You better be careful what lies you tell," he said to Loretta, lowering his voice. "You could lose everything." But Loretta didn't flinch. "She's already lost enough," I snapped. "And we're done losing." He stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. Picked it up carefully. It was a photo of Loretta when she was 8, grinning gap-toothed, holding a sparkler in one hand and her teddy bear in the other. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said. "But next time we'll be ready." We called the lawyer immediately. She filed for a protective order and emergency custody for June. Clint was officially locked out. CPS had already opened a case. And Pastor Ray, God bless him, wrote a public statement to the county clerk demanding accountability. We weren't just building a case. We were building a wall between Clint and everything he thought he owned. But fear doesn't leave quietly. That night, we heard a car driving slow past the house. Loretta peeked out the window and gasped. "It's him." He was just sitting there in his truck, staring at the house like a dog locked out of his own yard. We didn't go outside. We didn't speak to him. We called the sheriff. And when they showed up, Clint peeled off down the road like a coward. But that wasn't the end. The next morning, June came downstairs holding something in her small hand. "Grandma," she said, "I found this in the mailbox." It was a folded piece of paper.
No envelope.
Just one sentence scribbled in messy handwriting. "You think you're safe now? Watch your back." Loretta's face went white. I took the note gently and handed it to the deputy who came by later that day. They added it to the report. The lawyer filed it under harassment. The sheriff promised extra patrol around the house. And even with all that, the air in the house got heavier. That's when I moved back in. Not because Loretta asked me to, because I chose to. "I won't leave you again," I told her. "Not ever." We set up a security system. Pastor Ray gave us motion lights for the porch. Denise sent over her grandson, big, strong kind, to stay in the basement for a few days just in case. But none of that prepared us for what came next. 1 week later, we received a letter from Clint's attorney. He was suing for full custody of June. He claimed Loretta was mentally unstable, claimed she fabricated abuse, claimed I had manipulated her out of revenge. Loretta dropped the letter onto the kitchen floor and sank to her knees. I knelt beside her and wrapped my arms around her tight. "He's losing power," I whispered. "That's why he's fighting so hard." "But what if he wins?" she asked through tears. "What if he takes her?" I pulled her back, looked her in the eyes. "Then we go to court," I said. "And we tell the truth. All of it. Loud enough so nobody can ignore it anymore." She nodded. Tears still fell, but her back straightened. "I'm not scared of him anymore," she whispered. "Good," I said. "Because the real fight is just beginning." The courthouse was cold, even in the middle of spring. Everything about it, the gray walls, the fluorescent lights, the rows of strangers waiting for their number to be called, felt like it was built to remind you that justice doesn't come easy. Loretta sat beside me in the waiting area, her hands clasped tight in her lap, trembling slightly. I reached over and held them in mine. They were damp with sweat, but strong. She was no longer the girl who hid behind excuses. She was a mother now. A lioness prepared to claw through fire if it meant protecting her child. We had prepared for weeks. Our lawyer, Ms. Elise Monroe, was young but fierce as hell. The kind of woman who didn't blink when Clint's attorney tried to intimidate her during pretrial. We had testimonies: Darla Jenkins, Pastor Ray, Denise, even the school nurse who had quietly reported odd behaviors in June's school drawings. Clint walked into that courtroom wearing a new suit, a smug grin, and a Bible in his hand like he was some holy man. It almost made me laugh. Almost. The hearing began with the judge, a sharp woman in her 60s, reading out the charges. Clint's attorney was loud, dramatic, full of fire and false tears. They tried to paint Loretta as emotionally unstable, a mother unfit to raise her daughter, manipulated by an aging, bitter woman, me. When it was our turn, Elise stood calmly, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as a dagger. She told the story with facts, photos, records, testimonies. And then she asked Loretta to stand. The entire room fell silent as my daughter walked to the front of the court, hands still shaking but voice steady. She looked Clint in the eye and said something I'll never forget. "You took my voice when I was 15. You took my peace when I was a wife. But you will not take my daughter." The courtroom gasped. Clint's face twitched. He shifted in his seat, gripping the table like it was holding him down. Elise stepped forward again. "Your Honor," she said, "we are not just asking for custody. We are asking for protection, for a restraining order, for safety, and for the court to finally listen to the voices that were silenced for too long." The judge didn't respond immediately. She looked over the papers, scanned the testimonies. Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "would you like to speak?" I stood slowly, my knees creaking like an old rocking chair. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I would." I walked to the front, every eye in the room on me. I didn't look at Clint. I looked at the judge, at the people, at the truth. I raised Loretta alone after my husband died. I did the best I could. But I made mistakes. I looked the other way when I should have looked closer. And I stayed silent when I should have screamed. But I'm not silent anymore. I held up the letter I'd written to myself, the one I'd mailed after my first night out in the rain. Still unopened. Still postmarked. I've been telling this truth since before I had proof. And now I have both. The judge took the envelope, her eyes scanning the date. Her face didn't move, but something shifted in the room. Clint stood suddenly, slamming his hand on the table. "This is all lies," he roared. "They're twisting everything." "Mr. Ryerson," the judge barked, "sit down and stay quiet." He did. For once. An hour later, the decision came down. Loretta was granted full custody of June. A permanent restraining order was placed on Clint. He couldn't come within 300 feet of any of us. And the judge referred the case to the district attorney for further criminal investigation. It was over. At least, the courtroom part. We walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, the air suddenly lighter. June ran into her mother's arms, giggling, unaware of how close she had come to being swallowed by darkness. Loretta looked at me, her eyes glassy but peaceful. "You saved us, Mama." I shook my head. No. We saved each other. We drove home in silence. Not because we had nothing to say, but because for once, silence wasn't heavy. It was calm. It was healing. That night, I tucked June into bed and sat on the porch while Loretta cooked dinner. The stars were out. The breeze was warm. And for the first time in years, I felt safe. Not because the monster was gone, but because the women in our family finally found their roar. 3 months passed. The house was still the same on the outside. Small porch, chipped paint, a wind chime that rattled too loud when the breeze picked up. But inside, everything was different. Peace had settled into the walls. Not overnight, not all at once, but slowly like morning light creeping through old curtains. Loretta smiled more now. Not the fake kind she wore during the Clint years. The real kind. the kind that curled up at the edges, soft and bright and full of healing. She had started seeing a counselor every Wednesday afternoon. She joined a support group for survivors, women who wore scars behind their eyes, who spoke in low voices, but who showed up week after week because they believed in something again. In themselves. And little June? That child blossomed. She laughed louder, slept through the night, stopped flinching when doors closed too fast. She even started drawing again. This time not dark clouds and shadowy faces, but flowers and stars and grandmothers in superhero capes. She drew you saving the house from a fire last week, Loretta whispered to me one morning, chuckling as she poured coffee. I smiled. Well, she's not far off. We had started a new ritual, Sunday pancakes. Just the three of us. Every Sunday, no matter what, I made the batter from scratch and June got to stir, even if half of it ended up on the counter. Loretta played music on the old radio, dancing around the kitchen barefoot, her laughter echoing through the walls that once heard only silence and fear. But healing comes with its own challenges. The district attorney had begun an investigation into Clint's past. Darla testified. 2 other women came forward. A formal indictment followed. But the legal system moves slow, and every phone call from a blocked number still made Loretta's hands tremble. We'll get through it, I told her one night, rubbing her back as she sat curled up on the couch. Fear doesn't own you anymore. I know, she whispered, but some days it still visits. I understood that more than she knew. Some nights, I still dreamed of standing in the rain, locked out of my own child's life. That night haunted me. Not because of the cold or the hurt, but because it almost broke me. Almost. One day, while sorting through the attic, we found a box of Loretta's old things. Yearbooks, school trophies, a cassette tape of her first solo in the church choir. We played it on a dusty old player, and when her voice filled the room, young, pure, trembling with hope, Loretta burst into tears. I forgot that girl ever existed, she said. She never left, I told her. She just needed someone to remind her. She hugged me tight, whispering, "Thank you for never giving up on me." I held her close, thinking of every night I cried alone, every prayer I whispered in the dark, every moment I thought my love wasn't enough. But now, watching my daughter bloom again, I knew my love hadn't failed. It had waited. One afternoon, I visited Pastor Ray to drop off a pie. He sat with me on the porch, sipping sweet tea, his cane resting by the rocking chair. You know, he said, most people your age are just trying to make it to Sunday without a backache. I laughed. And I'm out here fighting demons. He nodded slowly. You didn't just save your granddaughter, Virginia. You saved your daughter. And yourself. I looked out at the sunflowers blooming near his gate. I didn't do it alone. No, he agreed. But you led the charge. That counts for something. Back home, June ran out to greet me with her arms wide open. Grandma, guess what? Mama said I can be in the school play. She did. I knelt to her level. Yep. I'm gonna be the moon. I grinned. Well, baby girl, you already light up our whole sky. Loretta watched from the porch, her face lit with pride. That night, after June was asleep, Loretta and I sat under the stars. Do you think he'll ever come back? She asked. No, I said quietly. But if he tries, this time we're not the same women he left behind. She nodded and we sat in the silence, peaceful silence, for a long time. Because in the ashes of pain, we had built something sacred. We had built a home.